very neglected within social policy, so I'm extremely glad to have been invited to speak. Thank you. The food sector, people who work in food are very highly networked. There's a large number of civil societies who work in this, but there's poor linking, as I say, to social policy networks. And I'm going to slightly stretch the issue because I'm taking social security in a wider sense, and I might even touch very briefly on jobs, which is not unconnected. Okay, here I go. So what might we mean by food security, which is not quite the same thing, but is a very powerful link, widely used, understood internationally. Lots of definitions. Broadly, it's that all people at all times have access to sufficient, appropriate food for a healthy and culturally acceptable life, and the confidence that that access will continue, which means people need enough money for food as opposed to other things. They can prioritise food, mostly they can't. They need access to shops selling food at affordable prices for which they don't have to pay a lot of transport, etc. And they need to be able to enjoy the choice and have confidence in the system. And many of those things are lacking in Britain. So what might we do? I'm going to try and be practical and concrete, and I'm not going to justify or qualify or cost things, except I would point out there is a huge opportunity cost already being borne, not only by many individuals and families, but by society, of not getting food right. Children can't learn at school, adults don't work properly, and when people have type 2 diabetes, obesity, and many, many other conditions which are powerfully related to not being able to have food security, it costs them and society a lot. Okay, we need firstly to recognise that charity and charitable solutions and food surplus, so-called redistribution, are not the answer, and arguably they're part of the problem. Secondly, we need to stop abrupt sanctions for benefit claimants. That's one of the main reasons why people end up having to go to food banks. We need some kind of other system, a red card, tapered, etc. We could spell that out later. We need to continue to push for increased entitlement and levels of social security benefits. There is a great deal of evidence. The current levels, well, actually the evidence is on past levels, which were higher than the current levels, but anyway, that they are not sufficient to enable people to eat properly or decently, in any sense of the word, biologically, nutritionally, socially, culturally. So we need people with increased entitlement and levels. And we need to begin to counter the idea, or continue to counter the idea, that not being able to eat decently is acceptable in a rich country, and that it's anything to do with personal failures or inadequacies, that you don't know how to budget, you don't know how to shop, etc. This is nonsense. And I think that is a really important, concrete, practical step to counter that negative, misleading, insidious narrative. And it links to what I've already said about entitlement levels and sanctions. We need to see a wider use of minimum income standards, such as the ones that are produced by the Centre for Research and Social Policy at Loughborough, which has a very systematic, consensually produced, expert-checked food budget within it, but it's a wider one than that, of course. We need to use those systematically within society. For example, when people are fined or when they have deductions made from their incomes for whatever reasons. There is a history of doing that in other countries. It's never been used like that here. And it would be very important, interesting, critical to challenge the use of caps in benefit levels by comparing that with minimum income standards. Moving on to other elements of social security, we need to ensure that all schools at primary and secondary level comply with School Food Trust standards on healthy food, which was a big achievement under the government that was operating in the beginning of the 21st century, which has been lost since the coalition came in with academisation. There's no obligation to do that. We need to ensure that provision for school holidays for poorer children, not just those who claim free school meals, is sustainable, and to move away from a reliance on charitable local effort. I mean, that's commendable, but it is not sustainable and it's not practical in the long term. We need to reinstate day centres which offer food as part of social care, and we need to get back to or move on to better meal provision to those in need who are in their homes, and that includes not just nutritional food put into their house, but somebody to be there while they're eating. The social element is a very important part of food, which is a very important part of sustaining well-being. What we don't need is what currently happens, which is that people get given 2 weeks or a month's worth of frozen food, which they have in their freezer if they're lucky, and that they're supposed to take out day by day and defrost and eat. That is not meeting people's food insecurity needs. I think we need to start, and this comes back to the point I made earlier about countering ideas, we need to start widespread conversations at all different levels and through many different networks on the pleasures and the essential needs for good food. It's getting beyond the biomedical, getting beyond simple, I'm a nutritionist, my origin, but it's more than that. Food is much more than nutrients. For good food for all people everywhere, and we need to build on, for example, the Sustainable Food Cities Network. There's already a lot of interesting work going on in a number of cities, Bristol, Brighton and Hove, Manchester, Glasgow, etc. I can talk more about that later. I think we need to challenge the idea consistently with evidence that we challenge the idea that people don't need fuel and equipment to be able to cook. In other words, that they can manage on cold food. This has been an idea that's been around for at least 25 years, that social security benefit levels are sufficient. It was said to me 25 years ago for people to be able to live on sandwiches, and that's nutritionally adequate. I don't think it is appropriate. Nowhere in the world are people happy simply to eat cold food. And I'm not against sandwiches. The same point I'm making. Cooking is an essential part of being human. People have done it for millennia and still do. People should not have to choose either between heating or eating, and I would argue also that people need spaces to grow food, and that is a very important way of engendering self-worth, family strengthening, community building. I can say more about all these things if required.
This is why I'm not a good timekeeper, I just get too into it.
No. I'll go on with 2 more then.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
And a little bit more I could add. I think whether this is stretching social security. I think we should insist that planning applications for new builds, housing and regeneration of high streets and so forth have to include not just one mainstream supermarket. I speak with feeling, I live in Oxford, and I could tell horror stories about that, but anyway. So a range of shops, food offerings, also allotments and bus routes, so that people are not trapped into one mainstream supermarket. And I think we should, the social support system, local authorities already do support quite a few local initiatives around food, but they could support much more, including farmers markets and local growers, building on what's already happening. All of that is about building confidence and a sense of security in your own area. I think we need to be able to tell good stories and tell them widely to counter the malicious and pernicious rubbish that's very widely said. And my one thing, just 2 very small things about jobs, therefore, which links into social security, is that we should implement a real living wage, uprated with inflation. People do need enough money to be able to buy food, as I've already said several times, and we need to push for better food provision for shift workers, who very often can't provide for the food themselves. A lot more I could add about resources, but maybe that'll come out of discussion. I've got some examples of stuff going on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
I think that's probably more than 5 minutes.